Welcome to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. I am Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
And so I have to say something, especially from the last episode. If you guys didn't know, since DaRon called me stupid, there's nothing better than a stupid mutt. So if you ever see DaRon, please let him know how much of a mutt he is.
He's just jealous because I'm Heinz 57.
Okay. Yeah. I am so jealous. I am as jealous as the weights he pushes around every day.
That's true. You are. That is an actual factual statement.
Oh man, it's amazing. But anyway, if you get a chance to see the mutt, please go check out check him out at the YMCA where he does all of his stunts. The extraordinary mutter, like you definitely cannot miss that.
For the record, mestizo is not too far off. Some people will take offense, but I've always called myself a mutt. I've said I'm, Heinz 57. And I openly embraced the term mestizo before it became popular. It has since become very popular, and all over Mexico and Central and South America run around saying, we're a mestizo nation. I was sitting there going, I embraced that term a long time ago because it was the proper term. And you know what? What's wrong with admitting, we talked about Obama a few ago, and I mentioned, well, everyone says, well, he was the first black president, but, he, like me, is mixed. I mean, he's not the same composition, obviously, but I don't run around just talking about one side. I talk about all of it because it's who I am. Now, I maintain the culture and things like that from both of my parents, and it just so happens that one side is more unique and purposefully almost extinct. So it's the one that I usually talk about the most because it's the most different. It's the most abnormal. But I also talk about Japanese culture all the time because, of course, I grew up in Okinawa, and I talk about Japanese and I talk about Okinawan culture specifically, and then comparing the two. So I have no problem calling a spade. Like I said, I mean, you have so many people that get so mad at other people's terms. Why?
Yeah, just a disclaimer. It's all jokes. Like it's not a big thing. It's just funny because people are afraid to talk about themselves or talk about their race or where they're in. And if you can't have that conversation, how can we ever get past anything?
Right. That's exactly right. And we've talked about that here before when we were talking about things like police brutality. We talked about how it's important to be able to have that conversation. And the truth is, Ron's a mutt too. No matter what he says, Ron over there, he's a mutt too. I mean,
don't believe him. Do not believe him. No, he is right. There's a lot of things that I learned. Just thank you, DaRon. I keep getting the rest mixed up, but thank you, DaRon. I started to learn a little bit more about my heritage and how things align. I still have a lot more to go, but I'm learning more from my grandmother's past and her family, and then even my mother's mother. And there's a lot of Native American in myself, and it's just different things. Now, how much of it is a difference, and I'm not going to ever say I'm like totally Native American, of course, but there's a lot of different mixtures, and with everybody, there's a lot of people in America that don't know that they're mutts and they're mixed.
Yes, actually, I'm glad you said that. I was going to bring it up too. Most people in the United States are mixed. Most people in the United States are mutts. Most people in the world are mixed. There are a few populations that have lived in isolation and continue to this day to live in isolation. That's the way of the world. We need to learn to embrace our whole selves. And I don't mean this in one of those hokey pokey, love yourself kind of deals. I had ancestors. Yeah, hokey pokey. I had ancestors who were terrible people, absolutely horrible people. And I had ancestors who were incredibly smart, incredibly nice. They benefited society. And that's the story of all humans. That's your story. That's my story. You had... please.
No, I was just gonna say I just because you're right, because there's some people in my family that were slave owners, and I'm just like, well, wait a minute.
Yes.
What? Are you serious?
Yes. What? That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And it's like Barack Obama, of course. He's tied to the Cheneys. And he has, as we talked about a few episodes ago, he has slaveholders in his ancestry. I have slave owners in mine. My wife does too. Now, the slaves were different, but I mean, slaves are
Yeah,
slaves. Like on my wife's
yeah,
side, she had, so she has both slave owners who owned entire tribes, because the way the Spanish and Mexicans did it was more hardcore than the
right.
United States and the British, etc. They said, we're going to enslave the entire village. And that's what they did. You see, at least the British and Arabs, etc., they actually, it was very rare for anyone to go off and enslave an entire village, contrary to popular belief. Because that's, like we talked about before, most were actually bounties from war given to them, sold to them from other African tribes and things of that nature. Spoils of war. But in her case, so she has a lineage that is notorious because they were so brutal to the Native Americans that they oversaw, that they actually caused the revolt that kicked the Spanish out of what was northern New Spain, or what we would call like the New Mexico, Mexico area with the Hopi, etc. It caused a massive Native American uprising that kicked the Spanish out of there for 30 years, because that's how mean they were. And,
Yeah,
and these same people raped, of course, etc. And eventually the offspring from the rape re-entered the gene pool, and so she has both sides of it. She has the people that are actually now extinct, so that tribe was completely wiped off the face of the map. That's how vicious the Spanish would work them to death. But that's how vicious the Spanish were. And the only thing that's left are these DNA fragments, for all intents and purposes, left, because these captors intermingled with their captives. And then, because the Spanish didn't bring over many women, because women didn't want to come over. It was mostly a bunch of soldiers, and that's its own issue. And so, and it creates a very interesting dynamic, and that's why it's important that we understand and embrace our whole selves. Because, I mean, nobody has a pretty ancestry. Nobody. Everybody's got people who are bad, 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 bad. I do. She does. Our dear friend
Every,
Roniel over here
yes,
does.
everybody does, and it's something that you got to get used to.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think you're so perfect, everything is perfectly imperfect. This is not a perfect world, so get used to it. Oh well, it's just life. It happens.
That's right. Sins of the father are not the sins of the son, and that's important. We've talked about that here as well. I mean, that's, you have to recognize that. So,
Yep, something to recognize and be recognizable. Also, speaking of, and besides those things, I have to ask you, what have you seen? Are you thinking of seeing anything? Now, Venom comes out this week, so everybody get prepared for Venom. Even though I'm a little bit disturbed that it's not really true to the Venom thing, somewhat, but it seems like it's going to be very interesting. I mean, are you interested in seeing any of those things this week, or have anything on your agenda to see?
so actually, all right. So on this note, I have been watching Reservation Dogs.
No, okay.
Okay, now I'm saying this in jest, but if you call yourself Native American and you live in the United States and you don't watch or haven't seen Reservation Dogs, you'll take a lot of flack in
Yeah,
general. And I've been watching it on and off since it first came out. Um, so I've been on reservations. I've never lived on a reservation. Okay,
yeah.
be upfront here. Uh, Again, my upbringing was actually with the military, etc., etc. Reservation Dogs is interesting. It's very familiar to me. Even though, like I said, I have not lived on a reservation and I don't plan on it. But that goes to something that's really important, and that is a conversation I've seen a lot. So, who gets to define what it means to be Native American? Who gets to define what it means to be black or African American?
Who gets to find whether we're African at all?
Who? Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I've mentioned it before, but for Native Americans, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You're forced to live on a reservation under most treaties and to have a certain, it's called blood quantum. Because, of course, as much as the United States tries to claim legally and officially, it has gotten rid of the, 1/8, one drop, 3/16, and all those other crazy rules tied to ancestry. It's not true because they forced and enshrined a lot of that stuff upon the Native Americans in treaty. So there are, it's very complicated. So what makes me a Native American? And I would argue no one gets to define what I am except me.
Right.
Just like I would say no one gets to define what you are except you.
Right.
And I think that should go for everyone. But there's a basis for me saying I'm Native American. I'm not like that Rachel, whatever her name is, who is claiming she was black when she's not, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. No.
And neither are you in this particular case, but I should be allowed to sit there and say, and I do, I'm mestizo. I should say what I am, which is I'm mestizo. But as part of that, I should be allowed to say I am Native American because I am Native American. I know the culture. I know portions of the language of my ancestors. It's very complicated because it's very complicated, but I know portions of it. And part of the reason why it's complicated, and this is something people don't like to talk about, is you can't use that as a basis to define whether or not someone's Native American, because the United States and Spain and Mexico and every other country worked so hard, Canada, etc., to erase Native American culture, that finding people who purely truly speak the languages is harder and harder. In Mexico, yes, there are people who speak their native tongue and they exclusively speak their native tongue, but it's very few. Most speak largely Spanish, and for the most part, their native tongue has changed as they learned Spanish, and in many cases, it's just completely fallen off the face of the earth, which isn't an altogether different experience, and don't hate me, don't flame me, than what you saw with a lot of the African slaves who came over here. In many cases, of course, they wound up having to lose the vast majority of their culture or having to adopt and adapt it. That's why for Mexico, for example, you get like the Day of the Dead and all of that other stuff. So what a lot of the Native Americans in Central and South America have done is they collapse together that Christian Spanish culture into their own, and it creates this weird hodgepodge. That's where voodoo comes from, is from that collapsing of the African cultures and religions down with that Christian influence. That's why with Native Americans you have witch doctors and all this other crazy stuff.
And we really wanted to kind of touch bases on that, on what the voodoo and witch doctors and witches and stuff like this. It's going to get a little weird, but I wanted to talk about that because, a lot of people don't understand and had a misconception of what voodoo really is. And it's not really what they think, especially with, Native Americans. I don't know, and you can tell me what it's called, but they have this thing where, the little stuff that they have that they give you with the little furry things. Like I've been given to it from different Native American cultures, people, and they would give it to me to protect from evil spirits.
Right.
And they think voodoo is just evil thing when it's actually not. It's supposed to protect, and it's sometimes it can be get it religionist, but it's supposed to protect, just like in Native America, it's supposed to protect from evil spirits. That was the whole concept of it.
Right. It's similar to the runes that the Vikings used to use, and I mean,
right.
Every culture has this thing, especially if you go back far enough. And I think that's the thing a lot of Europeans forget is they were this way too. You know, they look
Yeah,
at Native Americans and they're, oh, you all, you're so mystical and you love the earth, and it's like, well, actually, plenty don't, and we're not any more spiritual or mystical than any other group, and that's honestly kind of racist, but but
right, right.
they were this way. This was European culture. If you look at any of the medieval recreationist bands that run around all over Europe, you'll see eerily similar stuff. And you're
Yep.
right, it's not what people think it is. And part of the problem is Christianity fought against paganism in Europe for a very long time. That's, the whole, oh, well, St. Patrick went over there and rid Ireland of the snakes thing. Well, you know what the snakes were, right?
No.
Pagans. You know what he
Uh,
did to rid Ireland of the pagans?
what?
Killed them all.
Oh my gosh.
He literally was committing genocide on an insane scale. And he's got a day now. The man has a day now.
Yeah, no.
So, what people don't recognize is that European Christianity was fighting that for a very long time. And the whole witch thing, well, witches were just pagans. It wasn't this whole, oh, well, they have magical powers and all of that kind of stuff, that crazy stuff. That came about later on. That was a reaction to paganism. And you saw the same thing then get ported over to voodoo. Oh, they're going to cast a spell on you and they'll do all of this other crazy stuff. And in order to get power, these religions then take that propaganda from Christianity and then they stretch it further. And now all of a sudden you have, oh, the voodoo witch doctor can raise someone from the dead and they're now zombies running around and they can take your body over. That's where that's coming from.
It's make believe crap. Like,
Mhm.
like we've seen people who, do witchcraft and do
Mhm.
stuff, but there's a lot of them that worship different things. There's a lot of them that are actually pretty good. Like they're good people. However, doesn't mean that witchcraft is evil. It doesn't mean that it's really worship spirits or bringing people back to the dead or have some type of power or I mean, what do we think this is Doctor Strange or something? Like, are we
Right.
wizards? Like, are you a wizard? I mean, can you cast spells?
Right. Well,
I mean,
oh, please.
no, go ahead. I was just saying.
So my great grandfather was an actual medicine man, and he, like I said, he actually went from tribe to tribe, reservation to reservation when he came to the United States in the early 1900s, because his family had moved around. So the lineages, they'd been in Florida, their tribe got pushed up out of Florida, they went across the plains, across the south, and the southwest, and then that branch of his ancestry found their way deep into Mexico outside of the Guadalajara desert. So, and all that other stuff. So what came of all of that, he winds up eventually coming up out of Mexico back into the United States. Now, the languages are eerily similar, depending on which tribe you're talking about, because contrary to popular belief, it was very rare for someone to stay within a clan or a tribe their whole life. You would move around. How do you think Lewis and Clark, the big explorers,
Oh,
they
okay.
were really cartographers, traveled from one end of the United States to the other with only one main Native American translator slash guide?
Wow.
There,
It is
there's
something.
only one way it's possible. they moved around a lot, and the languages were similar, and so
that's how they were able to
right. And contrary to yes, there are families of languages, and they can be completely, utterly, totally incoherent to other people, just like all across Europe.
Let's get into the fact that Native Americans now. You could tell me if I'm wrong about this. For what I heard was there were, Christopher Columbus didn't do everything on joke, but even though we were talking about this before about, remember I told you that I had a conversation with some people in a studio, and they were claiming that they didn't understand where Americans came from, what is America, and blah blah blah. Now, from my knowledge, I always known that Native Americans are the real Americans, if you really want to be honest. And that could be wrong. They may not consider themselves Americans, but they're Native Americans, right? Um, and a lot of the things that Christopher Columbus was doing or Soke doing, it wouldn't be, I was told it wouldn't have happened without the Native Americans being able to help. Now, that could be completely wrong. Like it's taking like coming to this land, getting to this area, finding these things and doing certain things. Is that true or false?
So what he did was he looted and enslaved the islands there and actually exterminated the population completely. And it was through a variety of reasons why they died, but
and it's crazy because in Miami, as I heard, the Columbus statue, like they how can you worship this man who never really did anything and he eviler than what you think he is? They give you all of this. Like you ever notice they give you all these things in high school and they make big up these people and said, oh, they did all these great things, and you find out what they really did.
And he probably wasn't even Italian anyway. More likely than not, they believe he was Catalonian. He was Spanish, they think. He just happened to be from a... Spain was not the country it is today, and it was fractured, and there was a lot of... Actually, I guess it is. That is Spain today. Because Catalonia is still trying to break off.
I'm even trying to figure out why Ohio has like Columbus, Ohio. Get
it? Yeah, I don't know. There's so I look. It's a little difficult for me for a variety of reasons. I try. History is complicated, and it's hard to judge historical figures. Sort of. Like Julius Caesar. I actually really like Julius Caesar. Now, I mean, the man was an absolutely insanely brilliant military strategist. He was a very brilliant politician who really knew how to move the masses and get what he was what Trump wishes to be. He was the one who actually figured out what Putin then later managed to try to sort of do, but Julius Caesar did it better. That whole play of, oh, I don't want to be he jokes first. Oh, wouldn't it be great if I were a dictator? We'd get so much done if I were the one in charge. That was Caesar. And then that joke, then people start laughing about it, and people start asking the question very seriously. And then they start demanding that he be a dictator and place the wreath on his head. And of course, no, I wouldn't do that. That would ruin the republic. See, because that way he can now say, oh, I really didn't want to. And then the people insisted again and again, and finally he accepts it. And then, of course, it's assassinated. That is how dictators come to be. That's what some presidents have wanted to do and have openly stated, oh, wouldn't it be great? George Bush, I remember when he joked that things would go much smoother if America was a dictatorship. And
no, it would not. It would be horrible.
See, but here's the thing, though, about Julius Caesar. So he was a great military strategist and a fantastic general. His men loved him, which is why they crossed the Rubicon, which they knew was an act of war, of civil war with the man, which, by the way, wasn't uncommon because back then the wealthy had private armies. The empire itself didn't. not to any reasonable degree. But the man also killed 1 billion Gauls by his own admission.
Oh man.
So
I mean,
what he did was so bad that even the Romans at the time, even the Senate was like, "Oh, this is cruel and ugly. We need to recall this man." Which is why he crossed the Rubicon, because they were trying to recall him, telling him to knock that shit off, that they wouldn't put up with the extermination and genocide of an entire group of people, in this case the Gauls, because that's what he was doing. He literally was cutting down the forest and salting the earth and then destroying entire villages, which is why, of course, you get Vercingetorix, who gets together a band of 250,000 Gaulish warriors, actually manages to get the tribes to come together, and then they all get slaughtered in Alesia.
it does sound like Thanos to you.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So,
Crazy.
so my point is, I try hard to distance people's actions because no one comes out clean, right? So Gandhi had a 10-year-old wife who he slept with.
What?
Because he said that by sleeping with her naked next to him, it tested his strength that he could wait. And he beat her. And he was an old man at this point, just to be clear.
That's disgusting.
Okay, see, and that's my point. The problem with some people in the United States today and around the world is, and this goes back to what we were talking about, you have to embrace your whole self. And this includes as a country, which is important. So, I mean, we should not hide slavery. We should not hide the purposeful genocide of Native Americans. And we shouldn't hide what was going on in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We shouldn't hide the fact that Native Americans were still allowed to be enslaved after the Emancipation Proclamation, and open slave markets existed in free states that only allowed Native American slaves. In fact, they were the last slaves in the United States from a legal perspective. We're excluding, of course, sex slavery, etc. That shouldn't be hidden. We should accept that. At the same time, we shouldn't overstate it. But, you see people, they tore down Abraham Lincoln statues in Portland, Oregon. You know why? Because, of course, there was the Dakota Rebellion in, 1862, 1861? And the army came in and handled the situation, captured 300 Lakota men, and wanted to hang all of them, by the way. And Lincoln talked them down to just hanging 13. But they tore down his statue because, under his watch, 13 Native Americans were hung and he was just continuing the genocide and he could have put a stop to it. The truth is, he could not have put a stop to it, even if he had wanted to. Not all Native American tribes were nice. Some were incredibly mean. My wife's maternal tribe, for example, they were pacifists. They went further and further into the desert to escape the Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache. Now, if you know nothing else about the Wild West, know that most of the horrible stories you hear are about Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache warriors doing terrible, vicious, absolutely abhorrent, ugly things to other human beings. And their logic behind it was, well, if I do something so heinous, so ugly, you'll leave me alone. But that's at least the claim people say. I think in part that's revisionism, because they were doing it to pacifist Native American tribes, too. They were also doing it to pacifist white people who weren't attacking anyone. There were plenty of Native American tribes that were incredibly helpful to the people on the Oregon Trail. It was completely common for Native Americans to walk and guide them, to tell them where they could go for food, the best routes, and all of this good stuff. But my point in all of this being, accepting who we are, warts and all, accepting our country, warts and all. Christopher Columbus did a lot of terrible things. He was responsible for a lot of terrible things. I'm not a fan of how he was idolized and history whitewashed him like he was a great guy. I'm also not a fan of violent mobs, though. And I agree with where you're going, and I agree with your sentiment, and I understand your sentiment. But what we as a people need to understand is at the same time and I know you know this,
Yeah.
we can't go running amok and tearing down statues. Lincoln did nothing wrong. Quite frankly, if you want to tear down statues, I completely agree with tearing down statues of traitors. Confederate statues, tear them down, rip them down. I have nothing nice to say about traitors. And I know the British feel the same way about us.
That also goes with what's going on or happened with last year and will continue to happen. Rioting, mobs, and tearing down things is not going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve anything. And America's going to always be America. And that's something that we got to understand. But the biggest thing is, as we were talking about before, and we stated that if we can find a way for me to common ground and talk about these things and talk about some of the issues that we have as a race or individually, then we can start kind of see the problems and start trying to find solutions, which probably will never happen. But if we could start trying to understand that, like we said, everything is not going to be perfect. We're perfectly imperfect and we're never going to be perfect. So there's always going to be some bad, some good, and you kind of meet in the middle. But you got to first accept who you are and where you come from. So
yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And I think a lot of this goes to, so some of the most impoverished parts of the United States are reservations. I don't know if you knew this. In fact, reservations, counties with reservations, excluding counties where the population is majority prison, counties with reservations tend to be, they take the cake for the top 100 in all of the United States. It's just county, it's reservation after reservation after reservation. And I've been to Pine Ridge. I've been to Mecca, which, if you don't know, for my ancestors anyway, is Crazy Horse Memorial. I did not see the president's heads. I saw the Crazy Horse Memorial. No, this isn't some kind of backhanded, oh, I hate America thing. Again, strong support of the military, etc., not of decisions that are made, but point being, I'm not anti the United States in any stretch of the imagination. But at the same time, I did not see the heads. I saw Crazy Horse because Crazy Horse was more important to me, and I would rather see his face on a mountain than those 4 presidents.
I'm glad you stated that. Just know that a disclaimer that you guys would go to. Okay, so we're talking about something totally different. When you said Crazy Horse, most people might think of the Crazy Horse. Okay. See, Dan, you might have been there before. You might have been there, DaRon, been to the Crazy Horse. You never know, but we don't mean that Crazy Horse. I just wanted to make that clear.
No, you're exactly right. So, of course, Crazy Horse was a war chief, is what they're called. He led what's called a war band. So you don't lead a tribe, you lead a war band, and a war band is just again, Europe had the same thing, Africa had the same thing, Asia had the same thing, all across Asia, India, China, Japan, Turkey, Russia. War bands are a real thing. So a war band is just that collection. So you go out and you say, hey, I want to go do whatever, raid, pillage, active war, whatever it happens to be. Usually we're talking skirmishes. So you get together a collection of people who want to do it too, and you all go off as a group and you do whatever that thing is. Because every Native American was an individual. It was... so as far as North America, specifically like the plains and eastern seaboard, western seaboard are concerned, it was as close to a libertarian environment as you get. from the standpoint of, yes, they had money, they had a currency, but every individual had a vote and they could do whatever they wanted. And if you didn't like the way things were going, you'd just go off and join another tribe. That's simple. No one would complain. No one would hate you. You were done warring, well, you'd go off and you go to a peaceful tribe. You want to go settle down, go to a peaceful tribe. That's what you do. It was, nobody cared. No one would scream at you. So, but anyway,
except for DaRon. DaRon was huge.
I would scream at you. So, but all of this is important. And bringing up poverty, I mentioned the poverty because one of the biggest hindrances, I think, in the United States, far too often we make things about race, when more often than not, things fall into class. That's exactly right. Well, thank you so much. I hope you all have enjoyed watching our episode. And if it stirred up a little controversy or anger, I'll be all the happier, because the only way this is going to get better, period, is if we have discussion.
Definitely flame him down at the bottom of the comments. You can hit up the 2 mutts, the 1% mutt and the 100% mutt. You can definitely flame us down there. If you like what you've seen today, please subscribe, like, comment. Let us know any other topics that you are interested in or want to hear us talk about. Please comment that down below. And until the next time, this is our time. I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
See you later.
Have fun.
Everybody, sorry. Meet Momo. He keeps bothering me. Sorry.
That's the one who keeps knocking down the power and doing all this other bad stuff.
Yes, he's biting me right now. He won't let me alone. Leave me alone. So he doesn't like the fact that you're talking about dogs.